My name is Dr. Emily Carter, and I am 33 years old. 5 years ago, my sister told my parents I dropped out of medical school. She lied. Not a small lie. Not a misunderstanding. Not something that got twisted in translation between one phone call and the next. A deliberate, calculated, carefully constructed lie delivered on a Tuesday night to two people who never once thought to question it. Two people who chose to believe it without making a single phone call to verify it. Two people who decided in the space of one conversation that their younger daughter was a liar and a failure and acted accordingly. That lie cost me everything. Not some things, not most things, everything. My parents, my history, my seat at every table I had ever belonged to, the sound of my mother's voice on my birthday, the feeling of being known by the people who were supposed to know me best. 5 years of milestones that passed in silence. 5 years of holidays I spent alone on a couch with a dog who didn't know what day it was, and takeout containers stacked on a coffee table that had never once hosted a family dinner. 5 years of being someone's daughter only on paper. They cut me off without warning. They blocked my number without hesitation. They did not come to my residency graduation. The day I stood on a stage in a cap and gown and became the doctor I had spent a decade working toward, they were not there. No one from my family was there. I walked across that stage, shook hands with the program director, accepted my diploma, and looked out at an auditorium full of proud families and found not one face that belonged to me. They were not at my wedding either. I wore a dress my mentor helped me choose. My husband's father walked me down the aisle because mine had decided, based on a lie my sister told him, that I was no longer worth showing up for. I stood at the altar and made the most important promise of my life, surrounded by 30 people who loved me, and not one of them shared my last name. For 5 years I was no one's child. I want you to sit with that for a moment, before we go any further. Not the dramatic version of it, not the version with swelling music and a montage of sad moments, the quiet, ordinary Tuesday afternoon version of it. The version where you pick up your phone to share good news and then remember there is no one to call. The version where you pass a restaurant your family used to love and feel something move through your chest that has no clean name. The version where you are fine, genuinely, functionally fine, and the ache is still there anyway, lodged somewhere between your ribs like something that never fully healed. That is the version I lived for 5 years. And then last month everything changed in the space of a single night. My sister was rushed into the emergency room, bleeding, unconscious. The kind of critical that does not pause for anyone and does not negotiate with anyone. The kind that moves fast and demands faster. The trauma team was paged immediately. They paged the chief surgeon. The OR doors opened, and when my mother looked up from that waiting room chair, bathrobe on, slippers on the wrong feet, rosary beads wrapped so tightly around her hands the skin had gone white, and saw the name printed on the white coat walking down that corridor toward her, she grabbed my father's arm. Not gently, not the way you reach for someone when you are scared and need steadying. She grabbed him the way you grab something when the ground has disappeared beneath you, and there is nothing else to hold on to. Fingers digging into the flannel of his sleeve with a force that I would only learn about later because I was not watching her in that moment. I was doing my job. For bruises. Shaped exactly like her fingertips. That is where this story ends. But you cannot understand what that moment meant, what it cost, what it carried, what 5 years of silence made it into without understanding where it began. And it did not begin in that emergency room. It did not begin with a pager going off at 3 in the morning, or a chart with a name on it that stopped me mid-step in a hospital corridor. It began at a kitchen table in Seattle, Washington. It began with an acceptance letter, and a father who said 5 words I had waited 18 years to hear. It began with a sister who watched that moment happen and decided, quietly and deliberately, that she was going to take it apart. This is not a story about revenge. I want to be clear about that before we go any further because I know what it looks like from the outside. I know what you are expecting. The triumphant moment in the waiting room, the look on their faces, the poetic, cinematic justice of the daughter they abandoned becoming the surgeon who saved their other daughter's life. And yes, that moment happened, but that is not what this story is about. This story is about what it costs to be invisible in your own family. What it takes to keep going when the people who were supposed to be your foundation decide, without evidence and without warning, that you are not worth believing. What it looks like to build a life, a real, full, meaningful life out of nothing but your own two hands, and the people who chose to show up when your family would not. This story is about what happens when the truth finally arrives. Not when you force it, not when you demand it, not when you spend years building a case and presenting it in the right order at the right moment to the right people, but when it arrives on its own in a hospital corridor, under fluorescent lights, at 6 in the morning wearing your name on a white coat. The truth is patient. I learned that the hard way. And before we go any further, I need to know something. If you have ever had someone in your own family tell a lie that rewrote your entire story, a lie that cost you relationships, milestones, years you will never get back, drop a fire in the comments right now. And if you already know, sitting where you are right now, that my parents are about to face every single one of those 5 years at once type karma. Because they are. Now let me take you back. Back to Seattle, Washington. Back to a kitchen table on a Thursday evening in March. Back to the last moment my father ever looked at me like I was someone he was genuinely proud of, and to the sister who was sitting across from me when it happened, smiling with her mouth while her eyes did something else entirely. This is where it starts. And I promise you by the time we reach the end, you will understand exactly why my mother's hands left 4 bruises on my father's arm. And why, when I walked into that waiting room in my surgical scrubs with my badge at chest level and my name printed in clean block letters for anyone to read, I did not run to them. I walked. Measured. Unhurried. Spine straight. The walk of a woman who had spent 5 years becoming someone they would not recognize and had arrived, finally, at the moment they would have to reckon with every single day they chose not to believe her. Before we go into chapter 2, if this opening hit you somewhere real, if you felt that specific kind of ache that comes from being the one in your family who was never quite believed, drop a fire in the comments. Tell me you are here. Tell me you are listening. And if you think my parents are going to spend the rest of their lives wishing they had made one phone call, just one to verify what my sister told them, type karma. Because what comes next is where everything begins to crack. To understand what happened in that emergency room, you need to understand what kind of house I grew up in. Not the dramatic version, not the version with screaming matches and slammed doors and obvious villains. Our house was not like that. Our house was quiet, orderly, respectable on the outside in the way that working-class families in Seattle sometimes are the kind of respectable that gets maintained carefully, like a lawn that has to be mowed every single week, or the neighbors will notice. My parents, David and Carol Carter, were good people by most definitions of the word. Dad managed a regional logistics company. Mom taught part-time at a community college and did the books for 2 small businesses on the side. They worked hard. They paid their bills on time. They showed up to things that mattered to them. That last part is important. The things that mattered to them. There were 2 daughters in the Carter house. My sister Rachel is 4 years older than me. She came into every room the same way, like the air inside it had been waiting specifically for her. School plays. Student council. The girl who could sit down at any dinner table with any adult and within 10 minutes have them laughing and leaning forward and asking her questions like she was the most interesting person they had ever met. My parents adored her for it. Not in the way parents love all their children, that baseline unconditional I would step in front of a bus love that is supposed to be the floor of every family. They adored Rachel the way an audience adores a performer. With attention, with energy, with their eyes consistently pointed in her direction. My mother called Rachel her sunshine, not as a passing nickname, as a description, as a fact about the world. I was the other one. Not the problem child, not the rebel, not the difficult one who needed extra patience or caused scenes or demanded attention in ways that exhausted everyone. That would have at least been a category, a role, something that required them to look at me regularly and make a decision about what to do. I was simply invisible. There is a significant difference between being forgotten and never being fully seen in the first place. I spent most of my childhood learning that difference from the inside. Here is a small example. 7th grade. I qualified for the regional science competition, the only student from my entire school to make it through. I had spent 6 weeks on that project. I had read papers I barely understood, asked my science teacher questions after class 3 times a week, rebuilt the experiment twice when the results were not clean enough. I was 12 years old, and I cared about it more than I had cared about anything in my life up to that point. The competition fell on the same weekend as Rachel's dance recital. My parents went to the recital. I competed alone, took second place, and came home to an empty house. I put my ribbon on the kitchen counter. When Dad came home that evening, he looked at it and said, "That's great, kiddo." Then he put his keys down and asked Mom what was for dinner. He never asked what my project was about. Not that night, not the next morning, not ever. I told myself it did not hurt. I had been telling myself that for years by then, and I had gotten quite good at it. I poured everything I had into my grades instead. My AP classes, my extracurriculars, my college applications, my future. I built my entire identity around achievement because achievement, I had learned, was the one currency that did not require anyone to look at you to be real. It existed on paper. It could be verified independently. It did not need an audience. I figured if I could not be the daughter they noticed, I would become the daughter they could not ignore. And for one brief, perfect, disorienting moment, it worked. The acceptance letter from Willamette University's combined medical program arrived on a Thursday in March. I was 19 years old. Rachel was home for the weekend. She was 23 by then, working in pharmaceutical sales in Seattle, living a comfortable life in a comfortable apartment, with a comfortable routine that suited her in ways she would never openly admit were a ceiling. Dad picked up the letter from the kitchen counter while I stood across the table watching him. He read it once. Then he read it again. His eyebrows moved in a way I had never seen them move before, slowly upward, the way they did when something genuinely and unexpectedly surprised him. "Willamette Medical," he said. The words came out slowly, like he was checking their weight. "That's a real program, Emily." Then he looked at me, really looked at me. Not the glancing acknowledgement I had grown up with. Not the eyes moving past you to the next thing look that I had spent 19 years learning not to take personally. He looked at me the way you look at something you are seeing clearly for the first time, with focus, with recalibration, with something shifting behind his eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. And then he said 5 words. 5 words I had been waiting my entire life to hear from him. I will tell you what they were, but not yet. Because what those words meant, what they cost, and what they ultimately set in motion, you need to feel the full weight of first. What I can tell you is that for the first time in my memory, my father looked at me like I was someone worth being proud of. Mom called her sister that night. She called 2 neighbors. She updated her Facebook for the first time in 4 months, a post about her daughter getting into medical school that received 47 likes and 11 comments before midnight. Her voice had a quality in it I had never heard before when she talked about me. High and bright and genuinely delighted. Pride, directed at me, undiluted and unprompted. I sat at the dinner table that evening and felt something I had no practice name for. Something warm and slightly unbearable, the way it feels when your eyes have adjusted to the dark for so long that ordinary light becomes overwhelming. I glanced across the table at Rachel. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that exists only in the lower half of the face. Mouth curved, teeth showing, all the correct muscles engaged. Her eyes were doing something else entirely, moving carefully, measuring, taking inventory of something I could not see yet. I know what that expression meant now. At the time, I thought she was just tired from the drive. That week, Rachel started calling me more than she ever had. 2, 3 times a week. How was orientation going? Who were my professors? What was the campus like? What were my classmates like? She asked questions with the attentiveness of someone genuinely interested, remembering names I had mentioned in passing, following up on details from previous conversations, making me feel, for the first time in years, like my sister was finally paying attention. I thought something had shifted between us. I thought my getting into medical school had unlocked some door that had always been closed. Respect, maybe. Connection. Whatever it is that sisters who actually see each other are supposed to have. I was not feeding a relationship. I was feeding an archive. Every name I shared, every vulnerability I mentioned, every detail about my schedule, my professors, my friends, my anxieties, I handed it all over with a grateful smile, relieved that my sister finally seemed to care. I was giving her everything she would need. I just did not know yet what she was planning to do with it. And before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. If you grew up as the invisible one, the one whose achievements got a glance while someone else's got a celebration, the one who learned to need less, because needing more never seemed to change anything, I want you to drop a number in the comments. Any number. Just so I know you are there. Because what Rachel did next, what she had already been quietly planning from the moment Dad looked at me across that kitchen table, is the kind of thing that only makes sense when you understand what it feels like to watch someone else finally get the light. And I think some of you already know exactly what I mean. Third year of medical school is where most people either find their footing or lose it entirely. The coursework compounds. The clinical rotations begin. The gap between the students who are genuinely built for this and the ones who convinced themselves they were starts to show in ways that cannot be hidden or managed or studied around. Third year is where medicine stops being something you learn and starts being something you either are or you are not. I was. I knew that by then with the kind of quiet certainty that does not need to announce itself. What I did not know was that third year was also where my family would disappear. My closest friend in that program, my only real friend, if I am being honest, was a woman named Claire Donovan. She had grown up in the foster care system, moved through 11 placements before she aged out at 18, and had put herself through undergraduate on academic scholarships and sheer refusal to accept any other outcome. She had no family to speak of, no safety net. No one who would show up if things went wrong. What she had was intelligence and stubbornness in roughly equal measure, and the specific kind of warmth that people develop when they have learned early that warmth is not guaranteed and therefore must be chosen deliberately. She was the single reason I survived first year. When I called home once during a brutal stretch of finals, 3 exams in 4 days, no sleep, running on cafeteria, coffee, and anxiety, and my mother picked up and said, "Can't really talk right now, Emily. Rachel's having a hard week at work." It was Claire who found me sitting on the floor of our apartment hallway 20 minutes later, phone in my lap, not crying, just very still. She sat down next to me on that floor without asking any questions. Then she said, "Their loss. Now get up. We have histology to memorize." That was Claire. In August of our third year, she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. No family, no support system, no one. Just me. I went to the dean's office the morning after her diagnosis. I sat across from him and explained the situation clearly and completely. He listened. He asked 2 clarifying questions. Then he approved a formal leave of absence 1 semester, documented under caregiver status, my spot in the program held through January, all of it filed through the proper channels, with the registrar's seal on every page. It was legitimate. It was documented. It was entirely above board. I moved into the spare room in Claire's apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy twice a week. I sat with her in the oncology ward at 2 in the morning, on the nights when the pain got bad enough that being alone with it was not something she could manage. I learned which nurses were gentlest with the IV lines. I learned which anti-nausea medications worked and which ones didn't. I learned what it looks like when someone is fighting as hard as they can and the thing they are fighting does not care. 3 weeks into the leave, I called Rachel. I still cannot fully explain why. Some part of me, even then, wanted to believe she was the sister she had been performing, as for the past 2 years, the one who called twice a week and remembered every name and asked follow-up questions. The one who felt, finally, like someone who saw me. I told her about Claire, about the diagnosis, about the leave of absence and the plan to return in January. I told her everything. Rachel's voice on the other end of the line was warm as honey poured slowly from a jar. "Oh my God, Emily, I am so sorry. Take whatever time you need. I won't say a word to Mom and Dad, you know how they worry. There is no reason to add stress when you are already dealing with so much." 3 days later, she called our parents. I do not know the exact words she used that night. I would not learn the full architecture of the lie until 5 years later, when it came apart in the last place any of us expected. But the damage arrived immediately, the way damage from a precision strike always does, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, in the middle of the night, while I was sitting in a plastic chair next to Claire's hospital bed. She had reacted badly to her latest round of chemotherapy. They had admitted her overnight. I had been there for 6 hours. My back hurt, the chair hurt, the fluorescent lighting hurt. I was reading the same paragraph of the same journal article for the 4th time when my phone lit up on my knee. "Dad," I answered before the second ring. "Your sister told us everything." His voice was flat, arctic. The voice of someone who has already made a decision and is delivering a verdict, not opening a conversation. The dropping out. the boyfriend. All of it. Dad, that's not. Rachel showed us the messages. She showed us proof. I pressed my free hand against the wall beside me to keep myself upright. What messages? What proof? Dad, I am sitting in a hospital right now. I am taking care of my best friend. She has stage 4 cancer and no family, and I am the only person she has. I filed a formal leave of absence. I have the paperwork. I can send it to you tonight. I can give you the dean's direct number. Rachel said you would have an explanation ready. A pause. She said you would have a story for everything. My mother's voice came on the line then, shaking, high and tight in the way it got when she was trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. How could you lie to us for this long, Emily? How could you do this to this family? Mom, please listen to me. I have documentation. The leave is on file with the registrar. I can prove everything I am telling you right now. Enough. Dad again. Final. Closed. Do not call this house again until you are ready to tell the truth. You have embarrassed this family enough. The line went dead. I sat on that hospital floor for 20 minutes without moving. Claire's IV beeped steadily on the other side of the curtain. My phone screen had gone dark, but I could still see the call log when I pressed the button. 4 minutes and 9 seconds. That is how long it took my parents to erase me. 20 minutes after the call ended, a text arrived from Rachel. I'm so sorry, Emily. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep covering for you anymore. I hope you understand. Broken heart emoji. She was not sorry. She had executed the most precise strike of her life and signed it with a broken heart emoji as a signature. I was 2,000 miles from Seattle. I had $42 in my checking account, and I had just become nobody's daughter. I tried. I need you to understand that before we go any further. I tried everything I could think of from 2,000 miles away, with no money and a dying friend in the next room. Over the following 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 calls went to voicemail. By the 4th attempt, Dad's number had been blocked. Mom blocked me 2 days after that. I sent 2 emails. The second one was long, several pages with my leave of absence paperwork attached as a PDF, the dean's direct phone number in the body of the email, Claire's oncologist's name and contact information, and every piece of documentation a reasonable person would need to verify that everything I had told them was true. Neither email received a response. I wrote a handwritten letter, mailed it priority from my zip code. 5 days later, it came back returned to sender, unopened. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. She had written my name above the return address herself. I called my Aunt Margaret, my father's younger sister, the only person in our extended family who had ever treated me as though I mattered as much as Rachel. Margaret called my father that same evening. She called me back 40 minutes later, her voice carrying the specific heaviness of someone who has just had a door closed in their face. He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart. He said you had made your bed. 5 days, 14 calls, 2 emails, 1 letter, 1 intermediary. Every single attempt blocked, rejected, returned, or dismissed. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I had run out of things to say, not because I had accepted what was happening, but because I had finally understood something I should have understood much earlier, something that the science fair ribbon and the empty auditorium seat and the Facebook post that never came had all been trying to tell me for years. They had made their choice long before Rachel made her phone call. Rachel had not turned my parents against me. She had simply given them permission to stop pretending they were not already there. And sitting on that hospital floor with my phone in my lap and $42 to my name, I finally, fully, let myself know that. If you have ever tried everything, every call, every email, every letter, every person you could think to ask and still got nothing back, not even the courtesy of a response, drop a number in the comments. Any number. Just so I know you are out there. Because what happened next, what Claire's last months taught me, and what I found tucked inside a book the night she died, is the part of this story that changed everything. And I almost did not make it through it. Claire died on a Sunday morning in November. I know it was Sunday because the hospice was quieter than usual, fewer visitors in the hallways. A different quality of light coming through the window, pale and flat, the kind November gives you in the Pacific Northwest, when the sky has decided to be neither one thing nor the other. The monitor went flat at 6:22 inches the morning. I was the only one in the room. No family came, because Claire had no family. No one called, because there was no one to call. The nurse on duty came in within seconds, did what needed to be done with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to move through grief without adding to it, and then left me alone with the stillness. I sat in that chair for a long time. I did not cry. Not because I was not broken. I had been crying consistently for 3 months by then, in supply closets, and parking garages, and the shower at 2 in the morning. And there was simply nothing left. Grief has a capacity, and I had reached mine somewhere around week 6 of watching my best friend fight something that was not going to lose. What I felt in that room was not sadness exactly. It was more like the specific silence that follows a very long and very loud sound. The absence of something that had been present for so long its presence had become the baseline. Claire was gone, and the world had not paused for a single second to acknowledge it. I organized a small service for the following Thursday. 7 people came. Claire's former foster sister drove 4 hours from Eastern Washington, 2 classmates from our program, a nurse from the oncology ward who had grown genuinely fond of her over the months of treatment, a social worker from the foster care organization that had placed Claire as a teenager who had tracked her progress from a distance ever since. I stood at the front of a chapel that could have held 60 people and read a eulogy to rows of empty chairs. I talked about the hospital floor, about histology, about the specific way Claire laughed when something was genuinely funny to her. Not the polite laugh she used in seminars, but the real one, sudden and unguarded, that made her press her hand over her mouth like she was surprised by it every time. I talked about what it meant to be chosen by someone who had every reason to trust no one and had decided to trust you anyway. I did not cry during the eulogy. I had made a decision about that before I walked to the front of the room. Claire had spent her entire life in spaces where she was not the priority, where her presence was tolerated rather than valued, where showing vulnerability meant giving someone something they could use against you. She had built herself into someone extraordinary inside those conditions. The least I could do was stand up straight at the front of a mostly empty chapel and speak about her like she deserved to be spoken about. I owed her that much. That night, I went back to the apartment we had shared. Her coffee mug was still on the counter next to the coffee maker, handle turned the way she always left it, at exactly the angle that annoyed me every single morning and that I would have given anything in the world to see again. Her jacket was still hanging by the door. The book she had been reading was still open on the side table, face down to hold her page, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and fully intended to come back. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and my laptop open in front of me and stared at the re-enrollment application for the spring semester without touching it. Then I went looking for something to read and pulled Claire's copy of Grey's Anatomy from the shelf, our running joke, the book we had carried through first year like a shared talisman, the spine cracked in 40 places from use. Something fell out when I opened it. A yellow sticky note, folded once, tucked into the chapter on the pancreas. I recognized the placement immediately. Claire's dry humor operating even here, even now, right to the end. Her handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven in the way they had gotten over the last few weeks when the medication made her hands uncertain, but it was deliberate, every word placed with intention. Finish what you started, Emily. Become the doctor I always knew you were. And don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are. I will be watching. I will know if you quit. Don't make me come back and haunt you. She had written it weeks before she died. She had known she would not be there when I needed the push, so she had made sure the push would be there anyway. I sat on that floor for a long time holding that sticky note. Then I closed the laptop, opened it again, and filled out the re-enrollment form. 2 choices: crumble or climb. I chose to climb. Not for my parents, who had decided I was not worth believing. Not for Rachel, who had built a lie so carefully she had convinced herself it was the truth. Not for the version of myself that had spent 19 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be set for her. For Claire. And for the doctor she had been certain I would become. I went back in January. No family support. No safety net. No one in the stands and no one to call when things got hard, which they did, regularly, in the specific grinding way that medical school gets hard when you are doing it entirely alone. I took out additional student loans. I picked up a part-time research assistant position that paid $11 an hour and required me to be in a lab by 7 in the morning 3 days a week. I ate hospital cafeteria leftovers more times than I will ever admit to anyone who did not witness it directly. Medical school does not care about your personal circumstances. Anatomy exams do not pause because your family has cut you off. 12-hour clinical rotations do not shorten because you cried in a supply closet at 1 in the morning before pulling yourself together and going back out to the floor. The work is the work. It demands everything, regardless of what you are carrying. So I stopped carrying it during working hours. I put it somewhere and did the work. And then I came home and took it back out and felt it and then put it away again. I graduated on time. No one from Seattle came. I matched into a surgical residency at Eastbrook Medical Center, a level 1 trauma center on the East Coast, one of the busiest in the region. That is where I met Dr. Ellen Vasquez, 61 years old, chief of surgery. The kind of woman who has spent 4 decades in operating rooms and has zero patience for anything that is not precise, honest, or necessary, and who somehow, underneath all of that, had more genuine warmth than anyone I had ever met. She became the mentor I did not know I had been missing. And in the quiet way that some people do without ever announcing it, she became the closest thing to a mother figure I had left. Second year of residency, I met James Hartley. He was a family law attorney doing pro bono work at a community legal clinic 2 blocks from the hospital. Calm in the way that people are calm when they have genuinely thought through most things and are not easily rattled by the ones they haven't. Dry humor, good listener. The first person I told the full story to who did not flinch, did not offer pity, did not immediately try to fix something or reframe something or suggest a perspective I had not considered. He just listened, all the way through, without interrupting. And when I finished, he looked at me for a moment and said 4 words. You deserve so much better. Not, I'm sorry. Not, that's terrible. Not, have you thought about reaching out again? Just that. Straightforward and certain. The way he said everything. That was enough. We got married on a Saturday afternoon in Ellen's backyard. 30 guests. String lights. October light coming through the trees at exactly the angle that makes everything look like it was meant to be photographed. James's mother walked me down the aisle. She held my arm the whole way and did not let go until she had to. I had sent an invitation to Seattle 6 weeks before the wedding, addressed it carefully, included a handwritten note, mailed it with the same priority postage I had used for the letter 3 years earlier, the one that came back unopened with my mother's handwriting on the envelope. This one came back the same way. Aunt Margaret was there, though. She arrived 2 hours early to help set up and cried from the moment the music started until well after the cake was cut. She cried enough for 2 parents and did not apologize for a single tear. After the ceremony, Ellen pulled me aside near the dessert table and handed me a sealed envelope. A nomination, she said. Don't open it yet. You are not ready for it yet. You will know when you are. I tucked it into my bag without asking questions. I trusted her judgment more than my own by then. 5 years passed, and I became someone my parents would not have recognized. If you are out there right now building something real, a career, a degree, a life, a future without the people who should have been cheering the loudest, I want you to drop your city in the comments. Just your city, nothing else. I want to see where you are building from, because you are not as alone in this as it feels on the days when it feels the loneliest. And what I built from nothing, what I became without them, is exactly what they were about to walk into. Present day, I am 33 years old. I am the chief of trauma surgery at Eastbrook Medical Center. I have a house 20 minutes from the hospital with a porch that catches the morning light at exactly the right angle between 7 and 8. The kind of light that makes the whole yard look like something out of a photograph, soft and unhurried, before the day has had a chance to become what it is going to become. I have a husband who makes me laugh every single day without trying particularly hard. A golden retriever named Atlas who has never once judged me for eating cereal at 11 at night, and who considers his primary function to be warmth specifically, applying as much of his body weight to my feet as physically possible whenever I sit still for more than 30 seconds. It is a real life. A good one. Built brick by brick with my own 2 hands from the rubble of everything that fell apart in that hospital corridor in Portland when I was 27 years old and had $42 to my name. I want to be clear about that, because this story could sound, from the outside, like a story about surviving something, and it is. But it is more than that. It is a story about building something. About what it looks like to construct an entire life from scratch, without the foundation you were supposed to have, using only what you could find and what you could make, and the people who chose to show up when the ones who were supposed to did not. I built that life. It is mine, every room of it. But there is a specific kind of ache that does not disappear just because everything else is good. It lives between your ribs, right in the space where a family is supposed to sit. I do not wake up crying anymore. I do not reach for my phone on my birthday half expecting a Portland area code. I have made my peace with the shape of things, the real shape, not the one I spent 19 years hoping they would become. But every Thanksgiving there is a moment, just a flash, where I count the plates on the table and feel the ones that are not there the way you feel a missing tooth, not constantly, not dramatically, but always. A small, persistent awareness of an absence that never fully closes. Aunt Margaret still called every Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, without fail, the way she had for 5 years. She was my one thread back to that world, the one person who had never chosen a side because she had never accepted that sides were the correct framework. She just loved both of us and refused to pretend otherwise. I never asked about my parents, but I always listened when she offered information. Mom and Dad were healthy, still in the same house in Seattle. Dad had retired 2 years ago. Mom had picked up more bookkeeping clients to fill the time. Rachel had gotten divorced 18 months ago. She was selling pharmaceutical equipment now, working for a mid-level medical supply company out of Seattle. The irony of that was not lost on me, not even slightly. 3 weeks ago, Margaret called on a Sunday morning the way she always did, but her voice was different. Careful in a way it was not usually careful, like she was choosing each word before she allowed it out. Emily, there is something I need to tell you about Rachel. Something that has been building for a while. I have been trying to find the right moment, and I think you need to know before it gets any further. I was standing in my kitchen with a coffee mug in my hand. James was outside with Atlas. The morning light was doing its thing on the porch. Tell me, I said, and then my pager went off. The specific sound of a trauma activation, not the routine page, the other one, the one that means someone is running out of time, and the clock started without asking anyone's permission. I held up one finger to the empty kitchen like Margaret could see me. I have to go. Trauma activation. I will call you back in 2 hours. Of course, she said. Go. Be careful. I never called her back. Not because I forgot. Because what Margaret had been trying to warn me about was already in motion by the time I hung up the phone. Already traveling at 60 miles per hour down the interstate toward an intersection, it was not going to clear in time. Already, in some sense, already here, already inevitable, already on its way to my operating table whether I knew it or not. Thursday, January 3, 14 inches the morning. The pager pulled me out of a dead sleep the way trauma pages always do, not gradually, not with any concession to the fact that I had been unconscious 30 seconds earlier. But all at once, full wattage, zero transition. James shifted beside me without waking. Atlas lifted his head from the foot of the bed, assessed the situation, and put it back down. The screen glowed in the dark of the bedroom. Level 1 trauma. MVC, single female, 34, blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable, ETA, 7 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes. In my car, in 6. The roads were empty and wet. That specific January darkness that settles over everything like the world has decided to be very quiet for a few hours and is not interested in being argued with. I drove on autopilot, the way I always do on trauma activations, running the case in my head before I arrived. Motor vehicle collision. Single female, 34 years old. Blunt abdominal trauma. Hemodynamically unstable. Likely splenic rupture, possible liver involvement. I had done this surgery over 100 times. I knew every step before I walked through the door. I badged through the ambulance bay entrance and walked directly to the trauma area. My team was already assembling 2 residents, a trauma nurse, anesthesia on standby, the quiet, controlled energy of people who are good at their jobs and know that the next several minutes will require everything they have. I picked up the intake iPad from the charge nurse's station and swiped to the incoming patient chart. And I stopped walking. Not slowed down. Stopped. Mid-step, in the middle of a hospital corridor I had walked 1,000 times, with the sounds of the trauma bay assembling around me beeping, footsteps, the intercom, the squeak of shoes on the floor, all of it pulling back suddenly like a tide going out. leaving everything very still and very quiet. Patient, Rachel Carter. Date of birth, the 9th of March 1989. Emergency contact, David Carter. Father, 2 seconds. Maybe 3? I was not a surgeon standing in a corridor. I was 27 years old, sitting on a hospital floor in Portland with a phone in my lap that had just gone dead, staring at a call duration of 4 minutes and 9 seconds. Listening to the specific silence of having just become nobody's daughter. Then Linda, my charge nurse, 3 years on my team, the person I trusted most in this building after Dr. Vasquez appeared at my shoulder. You okay, Dr. Carter? I looked up, blinked, set the iPad down on the station counter with a steadiness that surprised me. I'm fine. Prep Bay 2. Page Dr. Patel. I want him on standby for this one. The ambulance siren was audible now, close and getting closer. The doors opened and the stretcher came fast, the specific, controlled urgency of paramedics who know the difference between fast and reckless, and have spent years living in the space between them. Rachel was strapped down, unconscious, the oxygen mask fogging and clearing with shallow, irregular breaths. Blood on her shirt, not a small amount. One hand hanging limp off the side rail, swaying slightly with the movement of the stretcher. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there 5 years ago. Behind the stretcher, running my parents. My mother was in a bathrobe, slippers on the wrong feet, her hair undone, her face stripped of everything that usually composed it, makeup, arrangement, the careful presentation she had maintained my entire childhood. She looked like someone who had been pulled out of sleep by the worst phone call of her life and had not paused for a single second before getting in the car. My father was in flannel and jeans thrown on in the dark. His face was the color of old paper, the color of someone whose body has already understood something his mind has not finished processing yet. That is my daughter. His voice went past the triage nurse like she was not there. Where are they taking her? I need to speak to the doctor in charge right now. Carla, my triage nurse, 3 years working this bay, someone I had stood next to in more critical situations than I could count, put both hands up in the practiced way. Sir, family waits in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already here. The chief is handling this personally. Get me the chief, right now. Carla's eyes moved through the glass partition toward the trauma bay, found me gowned, gloved, badge visible at chest level. She read the name. I watched her read it twice. Her eyes went wide for exactly 1 fraction of a second. I gave her the smallest possible shake of my head. Not now. She composed herself in the way that good nurses do, completely, instantly, professionally. Sir, the chief is preparing for surgery. You will be updated the moment there is information. The waiting room is this way. My parents were guided down the corridor. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. My father kept turning back at every window he passed, looking through the glass like he could find something that would tell him she was going to be all right. She is all we have, he said to no one in particular. His voice was not steady. Please, she is all we have. I heard it through the partition glass. Every word, perfectly clear. She is all we have. As if I had never existed. As if the second daughter had been so thoroughly erased from the picture that even in a moment of pure crisis, in a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning, it did not occur to him that one of his children was already here. I walked into the scrub room alone and let the door close behind me. 30 seconds. That was all I allowed myself. I turned on the faucet and let the water run hot over my hands and looked at my reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink, distorted, warped, the way everything felt in that moment. The face of a woman who had been surgically removed from her own family tree, who was now being asked to surgically save the woman who had held the saw. I thought about walking out, calling Patel, handing it to him, letting someone else carry this particular weight on this particular night. It would have been cleaner, simpler. My parents would have owed their daughter's life to a stranger instead of to me, and there would have been a certain mercy in that for everyone. But there was a woman on that table with a ruptured spleen, and what the paramedic report suggested was a significant liver laceration. She was losing blood faster than it could be replaced. She was going to die in the next 30 minutes if the best surgeon in this building did not operate. And the best surgeon in this building was me. I paged Patel directly. I have a conflict of interest on this case. The patient is a family member. I am disclosing it now, and documenting it in the chart. If at any point my judgment appears compromised, you take the lead immediately. No questions asked. His voice was steady. Understood, Chief. I told Linda to note the disclosure in the nursing record. Everything by the book. Everything documented. Everything on paper. Then I pulled on fresh gloves, pushed through the OR doors, and looked down at the table. Rachel's face, still. The oxygen mask fogging and clearing. She looked smaller than she had on the stretcher, smaller than she had ever looked in my memory. The worry lines around her eyes were visible even now, even unconscious. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, she was not the woman who had spent 5 years dismantling my life piece by careful piece. She was a body on my table. And that was exactly how I needed her to be. Let's go, I said. Scalpel. And if you are sitting where you are right now thinking about the moment those OR doors closed behind me, about what it means to save the life of someone who tried to destroy yours, stay with me. Because what happened in that operating room and what happened in the waiting room afterward is the part of this story I have never been able to tell without my hands going completely still. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That is how long it took to repair what a red light and a steering column had destroyed. Ruptured spleen removed. Grade 3 liver laceration repaired with precision sutures, layer by layer, each stitch placed with the patience that liver tissue demands, because liver tissue does not forgive shortcuts. Internal bleeding from 2 mesenteric vessels found, clamped, cauterized, controlled, suction, clamp, lap pad, retract. My hands moved the way 9 years of surgical training had built them to move steady when steadiness was required, fast when speed was the priority. The residents watched. I could feel their attention sharpen during the liver repair when the margin for error narrowed to the width of a suture thread. I did not falter. I could not afford to. At 6:48 inches the morning, I placed the final closing stitch. Rachel's vitals normalized, blood pressure stable, heart rate steady. She was alive. Dr. Patel pulled his mask down. That was flawless. You want me to talk to the family? I dropped my gloves in the bin, washed my hands, looked at my reflection in the steel mirror above the scrub sink. Same face, same badge, but something had shifted. For 5 years I had been the daughter who disappeared. Now I was the surgeon who had just pulled her sister back from the edge of death. Those two facts were about to collide in a waiting room 40 feet away. No, I said. This one is mine. The waiting room was quiet at 7 in the morning. 2 other families scattered in the corners. A television showing weather reports to no one. In the center row, my parents. Rigid. Sleepless. Hollowed out. I pushed through the double doors in my surgical scrubs, mask around my neck, badge at chest level. Dr. Emily Carter, MD, Fax Chief of Trauma Surgery. Dad stood first. Doctor, how is she? Is Rachel? He stopped. His eyes dropped to my badge, rose to my face, dropped to the badge again. I watched the recognition move through him like something physical, a tremor starting in his hands, climbing through his jaw, settling behind his eyes as 5 years of certainty began cracking apart in real time. Mom looked up. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Her right hand shot to Dad's forearm and clamped down, fingers pressing into the flannel of his sleeve with a force that left 4 bruises shaped exactly like her fingertips. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that held 5 years. I spoke first, calm, clinical. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I am Dr. Carter, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your daughter Rachel sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration. Surgery was successful. She is stable and currently in the ICU. You will be able to see her in approximately 1 hour. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, not Mom, not Dad. I watched that land. I watched it cut. Mom stepped toward me, arms lifting, a sob breaking through. Emily, oh my God, Emily. I stepped back, half a step, polite, unmistakable. Her arms hung in the air between us, then slowly, painfully, dropped. Dad's voice came out rough. You are a doctor. I am. You are the chief. I am. But Rachel said. He stopped. Rachel told us. What exactly did she tell you? His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The machinery of 5 years of certainty grinding to a halt in real time. Mom was crying fully now. We thought you dropped out. She said you were. She told you I dropped out. That I had a boyfriend with a drug problem. that I was homeless, that I refused to contact you. No shaking in my voice, no tears. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. None of it was true, not a single word. Then Linda appeared at the door. Dr. Carter, sorry to interrupt. The Physician of the Year committee asked me to pass along their congratulations on tonight's outcome. She had no idea she had just detonated a second bomb. Mom looked at me, bathrobe still on, eyes destroyed. Physician of the Year. Internal recognition. Thank you, Linda. Excuse me. I walked toward the ICU corridor, spine straight, measured steps. I did not look back, but I heard my mother's voice behind me, small and completely ruined. David, what have we done? And for the first time in my life, my father said absolutely nothing, because silence was the only honest thing he had left. Now I need to ask you something before we go any further. When my parents walked into that ICU room and stood at Rachel's bedside, what do you think she did? Option A, she finally told the truth. Option B, she doubled down on everything. Option C, she played the victim and made herself the one who was suffering. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Because what happened in that ICU room and what Aunt Margaret walked in carrying an hour later is the moment 5 years of lies finally ran completely out of road. I came back that afternoon, 22 hours since the pager had pulled me out of sleep. My parents were still there. Of course they were. Where else would they go back to the house where they had spent 5 years pretending they only had one daughter? Mom stood the moment I walked in. Her face was destroyed, eyes nearly swollen shut. Emily, baby, I am so sorry. I held up my hand, gently, but firmly. I hear you. And I believe you mean that. But sorry is a word. It is a starting place, not a finish line. What I need right now is time. Dad turned from the window. He looked like he had aged 5 years since morning. We want to make this right. Then understand something. My voice was even. Not angry anger had burned out somewhere around hour 14. What was left was clarity, clean and simple. I am not the girl you sent away. I am not the girl who called 14 times from 3,000 miles away with $40 in her account begging you to listen. I am someone who built an entire life without you. A real one. And if you want to be part of it now, it will be on my terms. Not Rachel's, not yours, mine. Dad's mouth opened. Old reflex. Then it closed. And he nodded small, devastated. The nod of a man who has finally run out of ground to stand on. I looked at Rachel in the bed. Her eyes were open, watching me. When you have recovered, you and I will have a real conversation. But not today. Today you are my patient. I do not mix the two. I left, spine straight. I did not turn around. I am not closing the door. But I am the one who decides when it opens, how wide, and who walks through. 2 weeks later, Rachel was discharged. I chose the location, a coffee shop in Middletown, halfway between her apartment and mine. Neutral ground. James sat at a separate table near the window pretending to read briefs. He was not pretending. Rachel walked in looking hollowed out. The confidence she had always worn like a second skin was completely gone. For the first time in my memory, she looked exactly her age. She sat down and stared at the table. I am not going to yell at you, I said. I am not going to list every lie. You know what you did. What I want to know is why. A long silence. Then, because watching you become everything I had already given up on, I could not let that happen without doing something about it. That is honest. First honest thing you have said to me in 10 years. Then she said something I was not expecting. I also called your medical school twice. I tried to get them to revoke your leave of absence. I told them you had fabricated the caregiver documents. I stared at her. Your dean would not listen to me. He did not protect me, Rachel. He believed the truth. That is not the same thing. I set my conditions clearly. She would tell the full truth to every family member she had lied to, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, in writing. An email to all 47 people. Margaret would confirm delivery. She nodded. No performance, no pivot. That was new. I met my parents separately the following week. Same kitchen table where Dad had read my acceptance letter all those years ago. I need you both in family counseling. Not for me, for yourselves. You need to understand how you believed a lie about your own daughter without making a single phone call to verify it. Dad's jaw tightened. We don't do that in this family. That is exactly why we are here, Dad. Something cracked behind his eyes. Fine. I stood to leave, turned back once. James's mother walked me down that aisle. We cannot undo that. But if you want to know your future grandchildren, you start now, with consistency, not grand gestures. Grand gestures mean nothing here. What I need from you is time, real, consistent, unglamorous time. That is the only currency that means anything now. 1 month later, the Physician of the Year Gala, 200 people, James at the front table, Ellen beside him with that faint smile she reserves for moments she has been quietly engineering for years. The MC stepped to the podium. Dr. Emily Carter, Chief of Trauma Surgery Physician of the Year. Standing ovation. I walked to the stage and kept it short. 5 years ago, I almost quit. Not because I could not do the work, but because I lost the people I thought I needed to keep going. What I learned is that the people you need are not always the ones you are born to. Sometimes they are the ones who choose you. I looked at Maggie, at James, at my team in the third row. Then I looked at the back of the ballroom. Last row, 2 seats Margaret had quietly arranged. Mom in a navy dress, Dad in a tie he clearly hated, both sitting with their hands in their laps, looking up at the stage with expressions I can only describe as grief and pride fighting for the same face. And sometimes, I said, the ones you were born to find their way back. Late, but here. Mom covered her mouth. Dad stood. After the gala, Dad found James near the coat check. Stood in front of him for a long moment. I owe you an apology. I should have been the one to walk her down that aisle. James extended his hand. With respect, sir, you should have been a lot of things. But we are here now. They shook hands. Dad did not let go right away. Rachel sent the email on a Wednesday night. 47 addresses. 3 paragraphs. No excuses. Just facts. She ended it with, Emily never abandoned this family. I made sure they believed she did. That is entirely on me. Nobody organized a boycott. Nobody sent group messages declaring her finished. They just stopped believing her. And for someone who had built her entire identity on being believed, that was punishment enough. Sunday morning. February. Light snow falling outside the kitchen window, the kind that does not stick but makes everything look like it is being gently forgiven. I was making French toast. James was grinding coffee, singing off-key. Atlas was stationed under the table, deeply optimistic about crumbs. The doorbell rang. Mom and Dad on the porch in their winter coats, Dad holding a bottle of orange juice like he was not sure what to do with his hands. Mom holding a tin of shortbread cookies, the ones she had made for every school event of Rachel's and none of mine. Hi, Mom said. Nervous. Hopeful. Come in. Coffee is almost ready. Dad stepped inside and looked around the kitchen slowly, the house he had never been in, the life he had almost never known existed. He cleared his throat. Can I help with anything? I looked at him, 64 years old, standing in my kitchen for the first time, asking permission to be useful. You can set the table, Dad. He nodded, went to the cabinet I pointed to, took out plates, counted them, looked at me. 4? 4. He set them down one by one carefully, like they might break if he was not gentle enough. James handed him coffee. Mom hugged me at the stove, quiet, forehead on my shoulder. No words, just holding on. Atlas thumped his tail. Snow fell outside. The French toast sizzled. It was not perfect. It was not the childhood I deserved or the reconciliation that movies promise. But it was real. And real was more than I had for a very long time. My name is Dr. Emily Carter. I am 33 years old, and I am finally, slowly, carefully letting myself be someone's daughter again. I did not get revenge on my sister. I did not need revenge. I became someone who did not need it. And that turned out to be the most devastating response of all. Not a scheme, not a plan, just a life lived fully on my own terms. The truth does not expire. It does not matter if it takes 5 days or 5 years. The truth has a patient way of showing up exactly when it is needed most. You cannot rush it, but you cannot outrun it either. If you are waiting for your family to see you, really see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build the life you deserve with the people who show up. And when the others finally turn around, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide. You decide who walks through. I did not win by making them lose. I won by becoming someone they could not erase. 4 plates on the table. That is where we begin. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, or someone you lost and slowly, carefully found again, leave me a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Would you have opened that door? And if you want more stories like this one, the next one is already waiting for you in the description. I will see you there.